Welcome to another episode of Jay Leno's Garage. Today we're going to talk about my favorite kind of car, original and updated, not quite restored. This car has all original paint on the body. It's a 1920 Cunningham. Now, if you've never heard of Cunningham, that's not unusual. Not many people have. Cunninghams were built in Rochester, New York. Cunningham is one of those old American companies. They made wagons and carriages. They started in the early 1800s, and then in the late 1800s they produced a few electric cars. And then since they were primarily carriage makers and bodybuilders, they got into the automobile business by buying other people's engines and putting their bodies on them. And then in the teens they started, well, maybe 1908, 1910, they started producing their own engines and eventually made the entire car in the Cunningham factory. Now this one has a 442 cubic inch V8. A lot of times people round it off and call it a 450 cubic inch V8, which I've done too, but it's actually 442 cubic inches. And this is an expensive car. Cunningham were right up there with Rolls-Royce. Cunningham did very little advertising. These were bought by people like the Rockefellers and the Vanderbilts. They were old money cars. And while everybody else was copying Henry Ford, the assembly line, Cunningham built their cars by hand. Every nut and bolt, every part of the car was made in the Cunningham factory. And from what I've read, the workers seemed to enjoy working there, and it seemed to be like a family-run business where the boss knew everybody's name, and it just seemed like a nice place to work, where craftsmen could work. They were pretty traditional. They had a few cutting-edge ideas. They were one of the first people to do away with the running board and just put in the step plate instead. One of the first V8s, Cadillac had a V8, of course. Cunningham's came out in 1916. Theirs was the biggest. This had 90 horsepower, which doesn't sound like much, but most cars, like a Model T, had 22 horsepower. Don't forget, in 1918, 1919, the speed limit was 20 miles an hour. Then I think in maybe 1920 or so, it went up to 30 miles an hour, and that was the speed limit. So this car seemed incredibly fast back in the day. I know 90 horsepower doesn't seem like much, but when the speed limit is only 30 miles an hour, and it's a V8 with a lot of torque, you can pull away in third gear in this thing, or you're even in fourth gear, and go, oh geez, I'm sorry, I didn't realize I wasn't in first gear. So it's got that much torque. Let me show you the car as I found it. I got it from two guys named David and Scott. It's been in their family for a long time. Let me show you some pictures as we pulled it out of the barn, technically a garage, and we'll show you what it looked like. It really wasn't in bad shape. It just needed to be cleaned up. That's all it needed, and totally gone through mechanically. The engine was pretty tired. I mean, it was just worn out. We put it back. Someone had put high compression pistons in it at some point in its life, and wasn't right for the car. So we went back. Compression ratio is not much, 5.2, something like that. So we put it back to totally stock. And I want to show you some paperwork I got on the car too. Take a look. You know, people that love old cars tend to save every bit of paraphernalia and automobilia that comes with it. There's a 1962 registration. Now here are some very rare factory photos. Those are some other Cunningham models. These are not the V8, these are a little earlier. But the cool thing is they're factory photos. This is what the factory used. Cunninghams are very rare. They didn't advertise very much, so guys that have these tend to save every piece of literature that exists on them. There's that famous V8 again. Okay, here's my car back in the day. There it is there. I'm guessing this is the early 50s. Look at the springs. I'm guessing these pictures were taken probably just about the time I was born. Here's an old issue of Road and Track, 1956. There it is right there. This is a book put out by the Cunningham factory. It's called The Pursuit of Excellence, and it was all about the era of optimism. It was all about, there's the company picnic. Look at those guys, huh? Yeah. instruction book on how to run your Cunningham. Original notes from the original owner. That's pretty cool. There's the poster I have in my garage right there. That's the one we blew up. Well, here's something kind of cool. We have the great-great-grandson of the founder of the Cunningham Company here today. Let's bring him in here. Dr. Michael Cunningham. You're a pediatrician, correct?
Yes.
Oh, very cool. Well, you come from a very illustrious family. This is this is very impressive. This is very impressive. So, your grandfather started. Your great-grandfather started the car part.
Yeah.
And your great-great-grandfather was a carriage company. Is that correct?
Yes, in Rochester, New York.
Now, did you know a lot of the history of this when you were a kid? Was it something your family spoke about?
Oh, definitely.
Yeah. Now, the company went out of business, what, about 31, something like that?
Well, they stopped making their own cars in the late 20s, and then they started making bodies for other companies after that, until about 37.
And this was a really high-end American automobile. This was the equivalent of a Rolls-Royce, or in that category. Have you seen many of the Cunningham cars? Do you hear from owners and people like that?
Yeah, actually, one of my cousins and I have spent some time trying to locate all the cars that are left in the world. We've identified about 80 cars.
Okay.
I've only ridden in two. I rode in this car a while ago. And I rode in my grandmother's car when I was 5 years old.
And what happened to your grandmother's car? Where'd that go?
It's at the Smithsonian.
Oh, that's pretty. So it was donated, huh?
Yeah, my uncle donated after his mother died.
So you can go down there and visit that car anytime you want.
Except for that, it's only on display, once every 20 years or something, because they have so many cars there. They don't have much room for limousines. Yeah. It's a limousine, so.
Oh, I see. Okay. Okay. And how many cars did they build overall? Do you have any idea? Not a lot, huh?
Well, I know it was in the thousands. I'm not sure exactly how many, something like 5,000 cars.
And again, Cunningham was not a company that advertised. I think they were a little bit above that. If you didn't know, well, the heck with it. But it's true. They were sort of to the, the carriage trade, what you call it? I mean, they were a car for extremely wealthy people. The Rockefellers, DuPont, people like that bought these cars, and they didn't do anything as vulgar as advertising. It's hard to find any advertising at all. That was pretty rare, and I get all the magazines from the teens and the 20s, and I go through them. Rarely do I see a Cunningham ad, because it was one of those vehicles, you either knew about it, or please, you didn't. So it was pretty cool. Yeah. Have you visited the factory or any of that stuff?
No, the factory's not since I was born was the factory functioning. The carriage company is still there. The original carriage company is, the building is still there. And I've been to the outside of the building, but I haven't been in.
Yeah. It's a fascinating piece of history. This one, of course, is pretty original. And these were expensive cars. This thing was $9,000 in 1920. Yeah. When a Ford was $260. I mean, that's like crazy.
It's either smart or crazy. Yeah, I'm not sure.
Yeah. Well, they were hand-built luxury automobiles. I mean, as we said earlier, this is a classic case of technology being expensive and labor was cheap. There was nothing groundbreaking about the engineering of these cars. They were just extremely well-made cars. This one, it doesn't overheat. I mean, the radiator is enormous for the size of the car. You could probably get away with a radiator half the size, but they wanted to make something that would be dead-on, reliable, and dependable. And that's pretty much what it is. And they didn't do much for sporty cars. This is about as sporty as it got. This and another speedster type car. Most were big, heavy limousines and hearses and things of that nature. Yeah. But it's a fascinating piece of history, and it's kind of meet the DNA of the original owner. So,
glad to see you.
Anybody else in the family have any automotive genes?
Not a whole lot, actually. I'm probably more interested in cars than anybody else in the family.
Do you have kids yourself?
Yeah, I have 3 kids.
Okay, are they car owners?
They like cars, yeah. All 3 of them like cars.
So that'd be their great-great-grandfather. So
right, exactly.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. Yeah. So maybe one of them one day will perhaps invent an automobile and carry on.
It would be nice.
Carry on the tradition. Well, very good. Michael, thank you so much.
Well, nice to see you.
It's fun to hear that fascinating piece of history. Let me show the engine as it looks now. This is the way it would have come from the factory. As you can see, you've got an air compressor right here. And the way that works is, let's say you got a flat tire. Well, you would pull this, you would shut the car off, pull this, the gear would engage the air compressor. It would pump and you'd fill up the tires with the hose that's under the seat. Comes a little oil can, We've tried to keep the car original where we could. As we said, all we've done to the body is just clean it up and polish it. We did repaint the fenders, had to find a couple of new lenses for here. Headlights, wheels, everything like that is original. I mean, it's amazing. This car has been loved its whole life. And I believe it's the only one with this body style left. I could be wrong, but I haven't seen any others, and I haven't heard from any other Cunningham owners. As you can see, it's all the original leather. We've treated it with conditioner to try and soften it up, but we haven't replaced the leather. We did have to replace the leather on the seats because there was nothing left of it. In here is a little jump seat that just kind of flips out. There's even a hood that goes up over this, which is really kind of stupid, but it's just part of the character of the car. Look at those springs. See, in the big sedan, the body would come back to here, but they kept the same chassis, obviously. This is your luggage rack right here. Just cleaned up the steering wheel a little bit. We fixed the clock and the dashboard, redid the gauges from the inside, cleaned them up. It is a 4-speed transmission. The car came originally, I think, with a 3-speed. Then they were called back to the factory in the early 20s, and they said that they put this 4-speed in, and they said, fourth gear might whine a little bit. I got a letter that says that, and he's right, fourth gear does whine a little bit. We had to make new timing gears. Randy Ema, the man who does the Duesenbergs, he's the premier Duesenberg restorer in America. Randy is great with these old original cars because he's the guy that did the restoration on this one. We didn't do it in our shop here. We've done a little bit of mechanical work to it, but Randy is a great preservationist. He knows how to get the most out of what was there with the car originally. So he did just a wonderful job. We had to make a new timing gear for the front of the motor, so you might hear that. It's a little loud until it wears in. Probably time to take it for a ride. The nice thing about this car is the effortless torque just sort of pulls you along. You know, this is not a freeway car. This is a great car on a 2-lane road where you go between 40 and 50 miles an hour. You have to get into the mindset of this car. Let's find a nice 2-lane road. I'm opening my hood scoop to get a little cool air in the cockpit. You know, although this car hitting 98 point whatever miles per hour back in 1919, that doesn't sound like much today, but back in the day, I don't know if it's fair to say 100 miles an hour was like 200 miles an hour is now. It's pretty close. I mean, there weren't many cars that could go a mile a minute. A mile a minute was pretty fast. A Model T had a top speed of about 42, and most cars were about 40, 45 miles an hour. So the fact that this could go almost 100, pretty impressive. You know, the interesting thing about old cars, if you restore them and put them back to exactly the way the manufacturer designed it, they're pretty reliable. As I said, with a 5.2 compression ratio, this car does not overheat at all. Somebody had put high compression pistons in it, and it was too much. You know, it's never going to be a hot rod, so don't try to make it one. Just try to keep it a nice, reasonably fast, comfortable, dependable car. You know, the interesting thing is, most traffic in LA isn't going much over 35 or 40 anyway. So these old cars are actually perfect. You never feel like you're going too slow. These kind of cars are fun to drive because there's such a mechanicalness to them. You know, when you you just feel the gear lever just click into the next gear. There's something to be said for hand-assembled automobiles. The only people that do that now is probably Pagani in Italy. You know, so many times with these old cars, we'd had to remake the water pumps because the water and the antifreeze, either the solution's not correct or the car just sits a long time, and the water, especially in California, that hard water corrodes the aluminum pumps. What I use in this car is something called Evans Cool. If you go to the website under the restoration blog, that section there, you'll see what the Evans Cool is. It's a waterless coolant, and it's a life of the car coolant. And in a car like this, which sometimes will sit for a month or so, I just put the Evans Cool in it, and it can sit for 5 or 6 years, and there's no corrosion at all. I use it in all my Bugattis. It's really an amazing product. The funny thing is, we passed 2 cars that were off the side of the road for overheating because it's a hot day here in California. Yet this thing's as cool as a cucumber. Oh yeah, the horn. These are the kind of roads this car was made for. Nice 2-lane road up through the hills, doing 45, 50 miles an hour. That feels just about right. I think with an overdrive, you can do 75 comfortably easy, but I don't want to stress the motor. "50 miles an hour, just about right," but back in the day when the speed limit was 20 or 30, oh my God, this thing's like a Lamborghini. Of course, you got your steering wheel. This is your ignition, advance, and retard. This is your hand throttle. That works as a cruise control if you want. Ignition switch here, headlights. This turns on a rear lamp. This opens and closes your little hood scoop there to get some, your louver, to get some air into the cockpit. Speedometer, that's your mileage. And I believe that's the original mileage, 39,000 miles. Maybe it's been around once, but I don't think so. Clock works, ammeter gauge, cigarette lighter. I'm not sure. I don't think that's stock. I think somebody added that because he used the motometer right up there. As you can see, can you see the temperature gauge? It's about 85, 90 degrees here today. We're going about 45, 50 miles an hour, and the temperature is barely in the normal zone. So she runs nice and cool. Well, I know you're probably waiting for a burnout, but I'm sorry. It's not going to happen. This car is almost 100 years old, so. Besides, people that drove these kind of cars didn't do burnouts. It was far beneath them. See you next week.